Well, good morning. We're in my clock shop at my clock bench, and the clock shop is just across the hall from the antique radio shop where I do all my antique and vintage electronic restorations. We're looking at a Chelsa desk clock or table clock, and a couple of my buddies that know antiques tell me that this is from the occupied Japan era, which I guess according to them was approximately 1946 through 1953. This clock was sent to me by a customer in Mississippi who found me on my website when he wanted to have his Zenith Transoceanic 1000D restored. And he was happy with the restoration, so when he got that back, he sent me this clock to be repaired. The Chelsa Clock Company has been around for a long time. It was established in Boston and made many, many clocks for the maritime industry. I don't think there was a ship ever constructed, or probably even surviving today, that does not have a Chelsa ship's bell or a Chelsa time-only clock on board. Chelsa also manufactured clocks for consumer use. There are some very stunning clock and barometer desk sets. Even not running, a Chelsa clock will bring a pretty good price. Just recently on eBay, there was a Chelsa time-only clock, the same movement that this clock utilizes, and a barometer side by side in the same stand, not running, with a couple of pieces missing, that sold for close to $350. As I said, this is a time-only movement, and when the clock arrived, it was not running. I disassembled the movement, cleaned it, oiled it, and reassembled it, and that is as far as I could go. The escapement is a platform escapement which can be parted from the main movement, as it is held by two screws. I took the platform from the movement. I had to do that when I cleaned it, when I cleaned the main movement, and I examined it, and apparently it had been to a shop where somebody who had worked on it had no conception of clocks. It was an absolute butcher job, and by that I mean the hairspring, the balance spring, had been stretched and it had been dished. So I took the platform to a watchmaker friend of mine who has more or less retired. He did a little work on the escapement, went as far as he could go, and then I sent it to another watchmaker friend of mine who has also retired, who's a past president of the American Watchmakers Institute and was my mentor. When I was learning clock repair, I wanted to be a little bit more skilled before I opened my shop in 1989. In actuality, I have been working on clocks for approximately 55 years. I started when I was 6 years old. But I can say that there are clockmen alive today who have forgotten more than I know, and I am pretty skilled at what I do. However, I am not proficient in watchmaking, so that is the reason that I sent the platform out to two different watchmakers. When Bill Biederman in Sparta, Wisconsin, returned the platform escapement to me, it operated perfectly. I installed it in the movement, put the movement into the clock. I have not had to do any regulating on this clock. It is keeping dead accurate time. The movement is held intact by 3 screws into a metal housing. The metal housing is stamped with a serial number which matches the movement serial number. It's important to remember, and if you are a clock collector, you already know this, and you probably are a clock collector, or you would not be visiting this site. However, if you are new to clock collecting, when you purchase Chelsa clocks, be certain that the serial number on the movement matches the serial number on the case. Many European clocks, and I am thinking particularly of French clocks, the bezel, the movement, and the pendulum all have the same numbers. You can buy a Chelsa clock that has a serial number and a case number that don't match. That is considered a marriage clock, and non-matching numbers render the value of the clock considerably less than it would be if the numbers matched. There are also clocks on the market, and have been for many years, that have the name Chelsa on the dial. Many of these are not Chelsa. They have a German movement. The German movement is a good movement, but it is not a Chelsa. So when you are buying a clock, a Chelsa clock, insist on examining the movement and the case to be sure you are getting the genuine article. I can say that comparing a clock that says Chelsa with a German movement compared to a clock with a genuine Chelsa movement is like comparing Timex to a Hamilton. There is no comparison. So I'm going to just turn this clock around briefly and show you some of the, as I start to turn it around, I'll show you some of the artwork on it. Some of it has faded over the years. The clock has probably been in storage or been handled or moved from place to place. The glass is a heavy beveled glass. Maybe just kind of catch the beveling down the side here. It's not a glass that if you break it, you can go to your local glass company and he can make you another one. It's possible to have a glass made. There are people who do such things, but the price is extremely high. Getting a little shadow there from the fluorescent light. I'll try to back off a little bit here. It has the serpentine hands. The paint on the inside of the chapter ring, this is the chapter ring, the paint on the inside is very fragile, and some of it over the years, because the clock has been to various shops, has come off. So it's extremely, and I can't emphasize it enough, when you work on clocks with fragile dials, it is extremely important that you take your time reassembling it to keep as much paint as possible intact, not to put any scratches on it, and certainly be sure that you have all of your cleaning chemicals out of the way. And someday I'll tell you a story about working on somebody's 47 Cadillac clock when I was in college. I did a lot of clock repair for students' parents, and a guy in the dorm who was a pretty good friend of mine, his dad brought, on visiting day, brought a clock, a 47 Cadillac clock, out of his collector Cadillac, and asked me to do some work on it. And that's a story we'll get into sometime, but that was over 40 years ago. And I've learned a lot. I hopefully learned a lot since then. Anyway, when you replace hands on a dial like this, you use tweezers. You don't use your fingers. You want to keep all the oil off that's on your fingers off of the hands. And of course, going back to the dial, you don't want oil that's on your fingertips on the dial. It's a very nice clock. Very handsome indeed. I'm just going to turn it around. It's heavy. This clock probably weighs in the neighborhood of 8 to 9 pounds, which is fairly heavy for a desk clock. Unfortunately, the key is not the original Chelsa key, and hopefully the customer someday will run across the correct key for it. It's a difficult key to find. It's a left-handed thread. Most keys have a right-handed thread. The little indentation with the gold disc is to regulate the clock. It's got a regulator that goes over the top of the jewel cap, and there's a piece on there that goes over the top of the hairspring, and that's how the clock is regulated. In essence, lengthening and shortening the hairspring. If you shorten it, the clock will bring the regulator closer to the stud. You'll run the clock slower, and further away from the stud, the clock will run faster. We'll turn it back around the other way so you can take a look at the Notice a few parts on the bench. It's been a busy week here in the clock shop. I'm just going to pan around real quickly, show you a few things that I've been working on here in the clock shop. There's a couple of bracket clocks. Oh, a lot of test equipment. We'll get into some of that someday as well. Talk a little bit about my test equipment collection, and we'll take a journey over into the radio shop too. A few clocks there. A couple of nice Waterburys. One in the center belongs to a good friend of mine. We have a Seth Thomas that's in need of a glass, and I happen to have the identical clock in my shop. An old Ingram, and we're testing one with the back off. And we see the balance wheel is operating very nicely. Looking at a couple of things, a couple of old typewriters. I buy a lot of old radios from a salvage yard in Anago. And the owner of the salvage yard has me do some restorations for him on speedometers, car clocks, radios for his collector cars. Somebody threw a couple of old typewriters into the junk pile one day, and he retrieved those and asked me to rebuild them for him. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but they've been sitting there for quite a while. Here we have a radio from a '62 Cadillac, Wonderbar radio, and some various other little things here. So we've kind of spent a lot of time looking around the shop this morning. I've got that's a bushing tool, Bergeon bushing tool. I use that to stake bushings into clocks. And in the stand, I have a movement from an Ansonia, kind of an interesting clock. It's a statue clock. Had some problems with it, so that's why it's running in the stand, so I don't have to keep taking it in and out of the case. And as you can see, it's running very nicely with the escape wheel tick-tock, back and forth. Dates to probably around 1898. And we're going to conclude. Let's see. This is genuinely how a clock bench looks. Morning cup of coffee. Spyglass. Record changer I'm working on. That's mine out of an old Scott amplifier system Scott radio amplifier system that I have, console. And I'll get back to that one of these days. Oh, the pipe. And over there, it's kind of fun, isn't it? I didn't intend to do this. I'm just getting kind of carried away this morning. We got a Suncor power supply. I have two of those. Keep one in here to service car clocks. And here we have one. This is out of a 1951 Oldsmobile. 49, 50, 51, 52 clocks, I believe, basically the same. So anyway, we're going to wander back here and take a look again at our Chelsa and conclude our demonstration this morning. A little review of the Chelsa. So, it's running quite nicely. And again, this is a Chelsa desk clock. Occupied Japan era, 1946 to 1953. And it will be going back to Mississippi to warmer climates very soon.